Come in.
So welcome, you guys. I see we have 5 people so far, and I can see people are working on trying to get the audio working and the video working.
Yeah, my video is not working for some reason. This is Vivian.
Hi, Vivian.
Hi.
I see yours is you have a line through yours.
Yeah, the IT department was supposed to work on my computer. They said it was good to go, but I guess not.
I think I can mute and unmute people, but I don't think I hope I can't turn your video on.
Thanks.
Yeah, that would be bad.
Hello, Tom. My name is James.
Hey, James.
How you
You're
doing?
James Riley.
I don't have a camera.
Okay. Yeah, I see you're on the phone.
Yes.
No problem.
One of my coworkers, she should be coming in too. She should be coming in soon too.
Okay,
well.
great. So I am recording. Ann Murphy from the MHTTC asked me to record, and so no profanity. So I believe we're set up so that if one person talks, I could be wrong about that, their face should maximize. Let me make sure we're doing that. Pause recording. Okay. All right. Well, why don't we get started? My name is Tom Bartholomew. I'm your host through this journey through clinical supervision. And probably the most difficult part of this experience, at least for me, will be the logistics of this Zoom interface. I've done quite a few trainings and classes on Zoom, but never with 25 people and trying to be interactive. So we'll do our best. Do me a favor and mute your mics unless you want to talk, and then unmute. That way we won't have a lot of background music. I can actually mute you guys. I did it. So if you want to talk, just click on your little speaker and you can unmute yourself. Or you can make off-color hand gestures if you want, or birds flying or whatever. So as you may know, the MHTTC is based at Rutgers University in New Jersey, and I am on the faculty of the School of Health Professions, the Department of Psychiatric Rehabilitation and Counseling Professions. I've been doing this work nearly 30 years, which obviously I must have started when I was 2 because I'm obviously a young man. And within the last few years, I've really become interested in clinical supervision and discovered some things that immediately made me a better supervisor. And so I'm really excited to share with you guys some of the things I found, because I've been a supervisor for most of my career, and frankly, I didn't know what I was doing. I never had I never had a good training in it. Even if I knew clinically what I was doing, I didn't always know how to translate that with the people I was supervising. So there's, all right. So, oops. As I mentioned, the MHTTC is located at Rutgers University, and this is a long-term grant to provide technical assistance. And this is one of the first webinar series on clinical supervision, but there'll be others. And so if you check out, I believe it's the next slide, there's a link there. If you're interested in other resources, other topics, they're coming soon. So you can stay abreast with that if you get on the mailing list, I guess it is. All right. All right, so just a little bit of kind of a funny story. I once taught a class with two people, and one of them fell asleep. It was really one of the funniest professional experiences of my entire life. Anyway, I'm not sure why I told you that, but I just thought it was so funny. Hopefully you guys don't fall asleep. Here is the training series agenda, and they're grouped by topics. And the topics will not likely last a single hour, particularly the first topic, because we're going to try and do some introductions and stuff. So, but you get a sense it's a pretty broad approach to clinical supervision. I've been doing this for a while now. I received a grant from the National Institute of Health to study a program called Illness Management and Recovery, IMR. And part of that grant, we did a clinical supervision initiative to try to improve the clinical skills of the people providing IMR. So that was probably for me, the cutting edge science of clinical supervision. But I've also done a number of projects here in New Jersey using clinical supervision to try to prevent inpatient violence. And I'm also consulting with the state of Washington out west, doing a large training initiative on clinical supervision. So my background, I mentioned about 30 years in this field of psychiatric rehabilitation, and on the faculty of Rutgers University for just shy of 15 years, I believe. So I'm tired. No. All right, so here are the objectives for the first topic, and they have to do with what are called the common factors of clinical supervision and understanding what some of those are. And there are quite a few of them, but if you can remember 3, that would be great. The next thing is what are called the generic functions of clinical supervision. And there are 3 of them. And I will be coming back to this. This is one of the things that helped me so much to improve my clinical supervision and just give me a way of understanding how to think about clinical supervision. So keep your eye out for these generic functions of clinical supervision. They're really, really helpful and important. And as I mentioned, I once taught a class, person fell asleep. So I'll try to be as entertaining as possible given this web format at first. So I'm going to try to have people introduce themselves. I have a list of everyone who registered, but it'll give you an opportunity to try to use your technology. And if you would introduce yourself and tell us how long you've worked in mental health, and what's most important, what's something interesting about you that most people don't know about you, okay? Something interesting about you that most people don't know. So let me start. I'm Tom Bartholomew from Rutgers University. I've been working just shy of 30 years in psychiatric rehabilitation. And something interesting, I started a YouTube channel on Sunday with my neighbor, and we fix cars and restore cars and stuff. So if towards the end you can still tolerate me, I'll give you the link for that, and you can check out my YouTube channel. Having said that, would someone else who'd like to go first? All you have to do is unmute yourself and let it rip.
All right, hello everyone. My name is Leslie from Triple C. I have been working in mental health since 2001, so that's almost 20 years. Something interesting about myself, most people don't know, I'm a huge astrophysics nerd.
Nice. What does that mean, Leslie?
I spend my free time watching videos and talks and lectures on astrophysics and string theory and relativity and stuff like that.
That's great. I'd actually rather hear you talk than me talk, so that's really neat. Leslie, here's an interesting fact. I worked at Triple C Housing and got fired.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
the only time I've ever been fired. We'll talk later. I'll tell you. Thank you. Thank you. This is really interesting. All right, how about someone else?
Hi there. Good afternoon. This is Jocelyn. I'm from the Mercer Council on Alcoholism and Drug Addiction. I'm a huge animal lover, and I have a dog. I have 2 dogs, but I have a dog from Aruba.
Nice. Did you say a dog from Aruba?
Yes.
How did the dog get from Aruba to you?
On a plane, and it was very traumatic, but now that they're here, they won't be going on any planes anymore.
Wow, that's really cool. All right, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Who's next?
My name is Vivian, and I've been in mental health. I work for Urban Health Plan right now in the Bronx, and I've been in mental health for about 20 years. And something that people may not know about me is I did the Camino de Santiago, the Way of St. James, walked from France to Finisterre. Yeah.
I didn't track any of that. You did the gummy noise? What? Explain that?
Oh, I'm sorry. Am I still having problems with this mic? I did the Camino de Santiago. It's called the St. James Way. It's a 500-mile pilgrimage from France to Spain. Yeah, this summer.
Gotcha. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. That's really interesting. Very cool. Oh, I think you have to unmute.
Okay.
Oh, I mean, here. Oh yeah, you're. I can see somebody talking, but it's not. We're not hearing you.
Hello, I'm James. I've been working in the field of substance abuse for about 15 years. It's been challenging on several levels. I don't know about interested. I would say simply I just love to play dominoes.
Nice. Do you do
you
it
know
for
about
money?
that? I mean, I just think things regularly. I mean, I spent 8 years in the military.
Okay.
But I just love being with my friends and just spending that time just playing dominoes because you get so much out of it. It's not just about the game itself, but it's the conversation as well.
Sure. It's the context and the people. Yeah.
Yes.
Very cool. Thanks, James.
All right.
Hi, my name is Jessica Bullock, and I'm a clinical director at the Passion Care Center in Perth Amboy. One thing that people may not know about me is that I love to play the drums. I'm a musician, and I play whenever I get a chance.
Nice. How long, Jessica, have you been doing this?
19 years, 2003.
19 years. Very cool. Thank you. How about somebody else?
Hi, my name is Jen. I work for Penn Medicine Princeton House in Hamilton, New Jersey. I've been in mental health for about 7 years. And something that people don't know about me is that I like to crochet and I like to make really big blankets.
Cool. What do you have to do to get a blanket?
A lot of yarn and be really nice.
Very cool. Thank you. Thank you. You said 7 years. Okay. Thanks. How about someone else?
Hi, my name is Danielle Grasso. I'm Director of Admissions Spectrum Healthcare. I've been working in the field for about 10 years, substance abuse. I would say something interesting is that I enjoy bodybuilding as a form of like my own self-care.
Very nice. Very cool.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, finally.
Yeah, I saw you
wasn't sure how
speaking.
to-
Couldn't hear you, but we can now.
Yeah, I finally figured out how to unmute it. So, this is Claire from Jewish Family Service. I've been working in the behavioral health, mental health field for about 20 years, and I am currently working on my dissertation for my PsyD in psychology.
Nice. Is that the interesting thing?
Yes.
Okay. Dissertation. Very nice. Do you know what do you do your dissertation? What's your topic?
Communication in the family of origin and its impact on adult romantic relationships.
Wow. Terrific. I thought you were going to say clinical supervision. Then I would just fell over. Right.
In the conflict resolution track.
Okay. Very nice. How about someone else?
Hello?
Yep.
My name is Lisa Lawson. I'm an LCSW, the Director of Certified Community Behavioral Health Clinics at Catholic Charities Diocese of Trenton. I've been in the field about a decade, and I am working towards my MBA.
MBA. Nice. Is that the thing of interest, the MBA?
Yes.
Cool. Very cool. Welcome. Anyone else? I suppose you can opt out, but you really shouldn't.
Hi, my name is Iman Gibson. I'm the Chief Clinical Officer at Integrity House. Seems like a lot of us Jersey folks are participating, so that's refreshing. I absolutely love clinical supervision, and I oversee our organization. And I was struggling with the interesting fact, but thanks to my colleague, I will just go that I just graduated with my MBA in December. So good luck. It's rough.
Nice. Nice. What was your first name again?
Iman.
Iman, right? And how many years did you say? I think I missed it.
Of clinical supervision?
Of work in the field.
I've been working in the field since 2012.
Okay.
So 8.
And you're a clinical supervision nerd, just like me.
Yes.
That's great. Anyone else?
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Benita Lochin. I'm a clinic manager at an opioid treatment program, Mount Sinai Beth Israel. I've been working in the field for about 17 years.
Okay.
And something interesting is I enjoy building furniture.
Wow. Building furniture, terrific.
So, Bonita, you work in the methadone program for Beth Israel?
Yes, I do.
So that's where I started.
Oh, okay.
Some connections here, yes. Very good.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Susanna Happel. I have worked in the mental health field since 2001. I now work for Triple C also, like Leslie. And I guess an interesting fact is that I took a break from about 2007 till about 2018 to work to help run a Bible school for my church for about 11 years.
Wow.
So
Very
now I'm
cool.
back.
And you're back. Terrific. Anyone else? 1, 2, 3.
Hi, I'm having, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm having a lot of technical issues today, so I apologize. My name is Carrie Basler. I'm the Division Director with Legacy Treatment Services. I oversee all the outpatient departments over the mental health and addiction programs. I've been working in the field for about 10 to 12 years. And then I guess an interesting fact is I am a book lover of mystery novels. So I love reading a lot of good mystery books.
Nice. Nice.
So I've also worked with Legacy.
Oh, wonderful.
That's pretty funny. You're a journeyman.
Apparently so.
Yeah. Anyone else? Let me see how many participants we have. We have 17 participants. I think we've had 13 so far.
Wants to say hi.
Oh, go ahead.
Hi.
Hi.
You know who this is, for God's sakes? Can you see me?
I can't see you.
Thomas.
It's Ruth Cook.
Really?
Ruth Cook. Oh, I recognize the voice. Hi, welcome. You're not on our list here, but I'll put you on here.
No, he was passing through here.
Oh, okay. This is a bit of a nepotistic journey. All right, well, let's keep going. Anyone else want to introduce themselves and something interesting about you?
Hello, do you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, this is Marcos Reyes from Carlos Albizu University, Puerto Rico.
Oh, great.
So I am program director of the PhD Clinical Psychology program.
Oh, great. Okay.
So I teach courses on clinical supervision and consultation. And something interesting, I am also a musician for a long time. So yeah.
Okay, great. Welcome. Great to have you. Great to have you. That's neat. Anyone else out there? It's funny, I see one of the video streams has a plant, which is pretty neat. All right, we have, there'll be a few people that, because of the late notice, short notice, couldn't make this session, but will be joining us later, and they can introduce themselves at the time. All right, and if I missed anyone, did I miss anyone that wants to introduce themselves? Okay, so the reason I asked about something interesting about you that most people don't know is because in my work in clinical supervision, I've worked with teams who had spent many, many years working together as a clinical team, but knew virtually nothing about one another. And when we did some basic team building, suddenly they found connections that they didn't have before. And you could see that it affected the team in really mostly positive ways where, you know, people said, oh, you garden too? I'm a gardener, or I'm a cook, or whatever. And this is going to be a sub-theme throughout what I talk about in clinical supervision, which is how can we use clinical supervision to prepare people to do this work for a long time and in a healthy way. All right. So let's get started to the actual material, and we're going to go till 2 o'clock, and it's about 1:22. So I'm going to start by just defining some of the terms in supervision, talk a little bit about the history, and particularly the history of clinical supervision in England, which is where some of the earliest records come from. We'll talk about some outcomes of the research into clinical supervision, something called the gold standard of clinical supervision, and then of course this thing I called the 3 functions of clinical supervision, which is what I believe is really critically important. All right, so the first mistake people make when they talk about clinical supervision is confusing it with administrative supervision. And this definition comes from Alfred Kadushin, who we'll hear more from later. But essentially, he describes administrative supervision as the efficient and smooth running office. So it's time, attendance, documentation, logistics. It's not, administrative supervision is not about the interface between you and a client. It's really about all of the logistical stuff that needs to happen. Like you need to show up on time for meetings and processions, right? That would all be in the administrative zone. And one of the problems I see a lot is when talking about clinical supervision, people say, yeah, I do clinical supervision, and then they go on to describe administrative supervision, or their supervisees describe receiving what is essentially administrative supervision. So we're not going to belabor administrative supervision, but really move on to this idea of clinical supervision. So here's another opportunity to unmute. What do you think the term clinical means? And or what is clinical supervision?
So for me, I would say that clinical supervision, it's like educational.
Okay, so one part of it is educational. Yep. Yeah, and particularly if you're talking about developmental supervision, where a young person is, or somebody's graduating from a program and they want to become a professional in the field, much of what needs to happen is they need to continue their education and learn the ropes, right? And learn what to do. Absolutely. Anyone else?
I think for at least for me, clinical supervision is more so having oversight of that of your supervisees' clinical care, helping them develop their skills as it applies to, you know, the practice of the different modalities, helping them process transference and counter-transference issues, giving them support in working with challenging cases, helping them recognize success and defining outcomes, treatment planning, and really just anything that would apply to client clinical care.
Absolutely. I think you did a great job. And if you think about the word supervision, the kind of definitionally, the idea that division is above or meta would make a lot of sense. So you're really watching out over the clinical work of your subordinates or your supervisees. That makes a lot of sense. Let's look at the definition here I got from so the definition I picked was clinical being the applying objective or standardized methods to the description, evaluation, modification of human behavior. So I really like this because, you know, now the big interest for many agencies are evidence-based or best or promising practices, all of which require that you understand the mechanism of action of the practice. And so applying objective or standardized methods would involve using motivational interviewing or cognitive behavioral interventions or educational interventions in a particular way. So I found this definition helpful and puts us right where we want to be when we're talking about the clinical of clinical supervision. So all treatments, and this is the kind of work I've been doing for many, many years, is trying to implement clinical interventions and particularly evidence-based practices. But even if your supervisee is using what we might call a therapeutic use of self, where they're trying to be authentic and congruent, communicating accurate empathy, things like that, it's still, there's an element of objectivity to it, right? That you don't want your subordinate to be trying to shame the person into change or guilt them into change or that kind of thing. So what's the other side of this? You often hear it referred to as drift, which you can describe as the unintended or unprincipled change in clinical behavior. So when a staff person is just angry at a client and is, you know, yelling at them or giving them grief or whatever, it's likely an unintended or unprincipled, like it's not something they thought out. It's they're being reactive, perhaps. And so one of the things we'll try to use clinical supervision for is to prevent this drift into unprincipled behavior or unintended behavior. All right, so many of you have probably heard of this idea of common factors in treatment, particularly psychotherapeutic treatment. And in the 1990s, the American Psychological Association tried to find out what was effective in the world of psychotherapy, and there were quite a number of theories out there about how to help people. And what their research concluded was that there were common factors that were driving the success of many, if not most, of these psychotherapeutic interventions. In other words, it wasn't the magnet therapy or the pyramid therapy or primal scream or necessarily, but it was the relationship with the therapist and the things the therapists were doing that were common across interventions, and they called them the common factors. Carl Rogers studied this in depth, and I'm a citation nerd, so you have to see on that slide, this article was cited 6,447 times. I would kill for 6,000. Anyway, you can see some of the things he's talking about. He says there's psychological contact between the counselor and the client. The client is incongruent, meaning they're, I don't know if you ever heard the term ego dystonic, but they're unhappy, they're anxious, they're vulnerable, they're open to change. And that the counselor is congruent. In other words, the counselor's emotions and words are congruent with how they feel and this kind of thing. So I won't go through it, but you get the idea that this turned out to be a really important thing in psychotherapy, this idea of the common factors. So when we study psychotherapy, we have to exceed the effectiveness of common factors in order for the theory to sell the theory, right? If, you know, otherwise, why not just do what Carl Rogers is saying, just use these, you know, lean on these common approaches. Any questions about this particular thing? Because this is, there's a lot more to this, of course, but this idea has been pretty important in the world of counseling. All right, so in my work, I spend a lot of time in these state psychiatric hospitals of New Jersey, and there's a long history of tradition in these institutions. And a colleague of mine called it the private practice model, meaning the hospital would hire people to be a professional within the system, and the professional was expected to bring with them the knowledge and skills and abilities to do treatment. And so there really wasn't an overarching clinical supervision model, but it was based on a kind of a private practice model, if that makes sense. Now things are really changing, where there's considerable evidence that certain interventions are more effective beyond the common factors if we figure out the mechanisms of action, if we figure out why they work and are able to maintain fidelity to them. And for those of you who don't know, fidelity is simply a term that means remaining true to the practice or true to the critical ingredients of a practice. And I think there's a little more on that coming up. But so this just represents historically a change in how at least large organizations are contracting to have services done. Now we're actually hiring people to do programs like dialectical behavioral therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy or IDDT, or, you know, there's 100 acronyms. I think you get the idea. So I use the term fidelity. Another term for this is treatment adherence. And there's been a great deal of work done in this area to try to determine what are the critical ingredients of various initiatives. One I think most of you may be familiar with is motivational interviewing. And what would be one of the critical ingredients of motivational interviewing? What do you think?
Do you mean the ingredients to implementing it as an intervention, or do you mean like what are the basic tenets of motivational interviewing?
Well, the critical ingredients meaning what is thought to make it work, and what would you want a supervisee to be doing? What would be the critical ingredients of the effectiveness of motivational interviewing?
Well, I think outside of having a basic understanding of the purpose and principles of motivational interviewing, and again, this kind of goes back to the mission of your agency, but I would expect that they also have a basic understanding of meeting the client where they're at, the client being in the expert's chair, and maybe even in a basic understanding of like interpersonal process approach, because motivational interviewing really only works when it's, you know, a reciprocal relationship, and understanding that both the clinician and the consumer are in the expert chair, but also that at the end of the day, intrinsic motivation and the will to change really only happens when the consumer is ready for that. So having the basic understanding of those tenets within social work or within psychology, I think are some of the basic frameworks that you would need the person you're working with to have. And obviously that's something that you could train to, but and then of course some of the things you can't train to are empathy, compassion, and then mutual respect for others. So that I think would be some of the basics of going into sharing that in practice with an intern or a staff person.
Absolutely, yeah. You mentioned some of the attitudinal requirements, and in some of the literature on motivational interviewing, they call it the spirit of motivational interviewing, which is really hard to teach or train, and you kind of want to try to hire people with those qualities. Yeah, I think you did a great job. Some of the other ideas is the idea of identifying and trying to resolve ambivalence, right, in a particular way. But so you get the idea that each of the practices that we might engage with have unique aspects to that practice, and some things that are essential but not unique. So something that's essential is that you have respect for your client, you use a client-centered approach, but there's also behaviors that are compatible but not necessarily unique or anything. So you might do an art project which is not incompatible, but just what is what it is. And then I think what's really can be helpful are behaviors that are prohibited by the practice. So you can't, or you're not supposed to define the goals for the person in motivational interviewing. That's a prohibited action. And if you understand the what's prohibited, what's unique, that's going to be helpful in steering somebody towards using the practice effectively. So this kind of shocked me years ago when I started to read about this, but the particularly not only community agencies, but state agencies try to use other things other than clinical supervision to meet some of their needs to improve practice. And one of them I call train and pray. And I know all of you guys have done this, so I don't even want to hear about it, which is the idea we're just going to train everybody in the agency to do something, right? We're going to train them all to do motivational interviewing. We're going to train them all to do whatever the practice is. And unfortunately, the evidence is really very strong that trainings alone don't do it. They don't change clinical practice. And this is a professional trainer telling you this, right? So it's a confessional on my point. And so we need something else. And of course, I'm going to make the argument that it is clinical supervision done in a particular way that can achieve these changes in clinical behavior along with training. I've heard some people argue that training is actually much less important than we used to think. That supervision, particularly supervision done with integrated mini trainings, can be really, really helpful. All right, so.
Can I just?
Sure.
I would actually share that. So I participated as a CARF surveyor for a couple of years. So I got to see some of the other organizations as well as, what I've been exposed to in Jersey, and I did the peer review. And from what I saw, it's like, supervision is a requirement, so it has to be done. And so oftentimes it becomes just like a formality within the organization, as you said, like a checkbox.
Yeah.
And including us, like we did this whole, everybody has to be trained on motivational interviewing and everybody has to be trained on this modality and that modality. But if it's not being reinforced in the actual practice, it's the implementation of it is poor or non-existent. And there is more emphasis put on like training rather than clinical supervision. And often there are so many challenges with it, including some that we experience ourselves, such as the restrictions with how many supervisees a supervisor can have, and then finding a qualified person to do it. That the individuals who may be hired to do that, if they are not a part of the program, they often don't even know what's going on in the organization to support the training efforts in their supervisory relationship with their supervisees. They're just doing what they learned from their field, what they learned in their supervision training. And your whole organization could be set on enhancing something else that they're not even educated about, aware about, or supporting. And so I think it's not as well incorporated into all of our work and all of our fields as it could be. And only speaking from my exposure, it may be, the total opposite for some others.
Boy, that has absolutely been my experience. And it's funny you use the term checkoff, because I think that's coming up as one of the ways people try to check the box, as you might say. But yeah, and I wouldn't even, sometimes it's an issue that the clinical supervisor may have been a really good clinician, but and in my case, I just didn't know what to do to be a good clinical supervisor. And I instinctively just kind of ran it as a process group. So I would say, how's everybody doing? What's going on? What issues do you have? And this kind of thing. There's nothing wrong with that, but it really left a lot to be desired.
Absolutely.
But yeah, go ahead.
Absolutely. That's one of the things that I'm running into my new organization. People are just used to what to do. I have a lot of super counselors, but no one really fully understands or takes ownership of their role in terms of being a leader. One of the things that I've been introducing is the importance of ensuring that every conversation that you have with someone is purposeful, intentional, and directional.
Mm-hmm.
You should really know why you're meeting, know what your intents are, and you should make sure that you're providing information and asking questions that are leading you into the direction of the desired outcome.
Oh, that's great. You said it very, very well. Yeah, and one of the things I've gotten very much better with is not being the expert, right? So now when I do clinical supervision, it's as participatory and egalitarian as possible. If I have some insight into it, I'll certainly share with people, but it's really not a transactional administrative type thing where I'm going to tell people what to do necessarily. So this is the second thing people default to, having to do with something called transactional leadership, which is just this notion of leaders come to believe that they can get the best outcome by just telling folks what to do. And as we go through this training series, you're going to see some evidence that that is not where we want to be, and that there are other more effective ways to proceed. There are some changes that are called stroke of the pen changes, which leaders can and should make, which, like stop using this form, use this other form, stop this process, that kind of thing. But that's very different than clinical behavior. And this, I thought was funny when you said it's a checkoff, which is the other thing they try to do, very similar to the just tell them what to do. But we see a lot of this, and you might recognize this guy, right? Come on, give it to me. That's Chekhov from Star Trek. Anybody who knows the chart. Anyway. So one of the things is very similar, and we're going to get some traction getting closer to clinical supervision in just a minute, but this idea of confusing outputs with outcomes. And what I mean by this is it's not uncommon for agencies to count the number of groups, the number of face-to-face sessions, and either not be able to or not choose to focus on what was the impact of that face-to-face session or that group or whatever. And it's really important, and it really begins to align us with good clinical interventions when we look at outcomes. No amount of groups is going to, looking at that is not going to help us understand what's happening. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the history of clinical supervision. And this comes from a woman, I believe her name is Carol Yedich, in an article in 2000. And what Carol Yedich talks about is that clinical supervision in England was originally begun to support nurses in their difficult job. And nurses at the time were quite subordinate to doctors and just did all of the grunt work. And so supervision was started to support them. It wasn't just this case, but this case certainly pushed things over the edge. This woman is named Beverly Allett. And in England, there was an Allett Commission convened after this woman was accused of killing a large number of children in a developmental center. And the question came up, well, how on earth is this possible? Who was supervising this person? You see where I'm going with this, right? And this marked a definitive change, at least in England, from support to scrutiny, right? Where supervision became, what are you doing? I'm going to, I need to know, I got to watch you. And it's funny, I'm watching the video feed and everybody's nodding their heads, right? Because a lot of us think of supervision in a negative way. It wasn't Beverly's fault if she was in fact guilty of all those murders. But we have certainly imported an element of this into the United States, and maybe Puerto Rico as well, confusing the role of clinical supervision with one of scrutiny. There's an oversight function, but as you'll learn, that will be a subordinate function to some other more supportive elements. Just one kind of outlier type of clinical supervision, and we won't talk about all of the various dimensions and types, but this one's interesting. This is called the isomorphic or parallel model. And this, you see this in psychology a lot, where if you're going to be using cognitive behavioral therapy, I will use that in the supervision to help you learn it, and I'll model that by using it. You saw this in the years of transactional analysis. They use transactional analysis in the supervision. But authors of, the better authors, you might say, in clinical supervision say, clinical supervision is not a replication of the therapeutic process, right? That's not the intent. And the isomorphic approach or parallel approach, there is a danger that we end up doing therapy with our supervisees, and we don't want to do that. So these approaches, there's a place for modeling, absolutely, we'll talk about it, but there's also a danger of slipping into the therapist role. Probably many of you are comfortable in the therapist role, but that's not the role of the supervisor. This comes from a dissertation out of Australia on harmful supervision, and this person found that there can be negative outcomes to supervision, and she identified poor emotional bond and poor ability to give feedback, as well as dual roles and role conflicts as areas of concern. I've read elsewhere where it was described that poor or bad supervision is worse than good supervision is good. Just wrap your head around that. Bad supervision is worse than good supervision is good. And what the author was saying was that if we have role conflicts or dual roles with our subordinates, and we take advantage of them, or we have prejudice or sexual stereotyping or whatever it is, resulting in bad supervision, it can be really devastating to our supervisees. So it's a word of caution. You will see that good supervision is really good too, so that's a plus. So I'm curious, what are some people's experience with supervision, good or bad?
I can share some of mine. I've had several supervisors. I'm a social worker by background, and I also obtained my LCAC, and I also sought clinical supervision for transgender care, so pursued a certification in that. So I've gone through maybe like 6 in total, and I've had some great experiences, some fine and some really terrible. And the most terrible experience for me, at least in supervision, was when it didn't become about the clients and it became more of a gossip setting, and clearly a violation of trust, in which the practice of other people who were participating in supervision with me at some time, whether it was a dyad or a group, who may have, had other personal opinions. For example, the transgender care, supervision is where you can go unload and get objective feedback and have that healthy conversation and process through whatever sentiments you had. But I did have a supervisor who shared the other person's experiences with me. And after that, I felt like you have just crossed a total new boundary. And now I don't feel comfortable sharing my experiences or my sentiments or my experiences with you about the process that I'm going through, because are you just going to be sharing my information with someone else? So the trust was immediately broken when that happened. And I never really got over that, and I couldn't really have an effective relationship. But at the same time, I was also very near completion, so I did continue the relationship. So it's going back to what you said, like poor is worse than good is better. So I knew that I needed to be done, and I did not want to start over, and I continued, but I had totally shut down to that experience and also just being a part of a group, you do get the opportunity to hide if that's what you're gonna do. If it's a very large group and it's limited in time. And then I've had really good supervisors, especially here at Integrity. I had a supervisor who's still with the agency from like forever ago. I can't even remember how many years, and he never allowed me to get off topic. He never allowed me to conveniently manipulate my way into a different conversation when I didn't want to discuss something uncomfortable or something that he was challenging me to explore further. And he, obviously sometimes we butt heads because of that, but I felt like looking back at it some years later, that's what I appreciated the most, because that's what really had an impact in me going back upstairs to my program and resonating on what he said to me.
Very nice.
Supervision. I would never give him that credit in that moment, but I'll say it to this group.
We'll gossip. He'll get it. We'll gossip. Well, it's interesting. I mean, you said a lot that was really, really important. Yeah, it's interesting. Sometimes when people gossip, they're trying to develop a connection with someone, but they're actually communicating that I can't be trusted, right? To maintain confidentiality. The other thing you said, which we're gonna get to, is one of the dangers of group supervision is the passivity of the supervisee, right? So I've done clinical supervision where people just sat with their arms crossed and stared at me, right? And they had no intention of participating, and they were forced to do it. Later, we'll talk about that as being externally motivated to go to supervision. Somebody told them they had to go, and they didn't want to be there. So yeah, that I think you said it very, very well. Anyone else? Yeah.
Yeah, can I share? I agree with a lot of things that she said. I've had really good supervisors, but I've also had a few, doozies. And I think one of the worst cases that if I had to describe was I felt like I was kind of souping the soup, where it was almost like I was the actual supervisor, that I was correcting my supervisor's behavior, saying, well, we shouldn't do it like that, or we shouldn't say that. And I felt almost like my supervision turned into my supervisor actually dumping on me. But I've also had a lot of really committed supervisors who promoted education and promoted just a learning environment that said, we have to grow and learn together. And I think that if you don't feel like you have that, that could be very detrimental to your growth. And the other thing that I would say is a lot of what's happening, people feel so pressured in supervision because everyone wants to, be a licensed clinical social worker. Everyone wants to private practice, but they don't want to really fully experience the experience in terms of the good, the bad, and the ugly. It's like they just want the signature, and when you correct behavior, you point out certain things, it turns into this kind of like us versus them type situation. And we have, in a way, with how this supervision is set up, we've kind of put a supervisor at a disadvantage in terms of I can't, if I say that your behavior, what backlash am I going to receive because I don't feel comfortable with endorsing this person to be a clinician. And so I don't know that we have enough support in those areas, because I have to tell you, when I hired individuals that come in with a license, there's a certain expectation that I have in terms of boundaries, ethics, and responsibility. And I'm like, mine is blown. Like, whoa, who signed off on this person? Who endorsed this person? How on earth is coming in here with this attitude and these behaviors, and it's so inappropriate that everyone could lose their license. The entire place could get shut down if this is not addressed immediately. And it's almost like you're being told that you're picking on someone by pointing out something that should be obvious if you don't have a license.
Yeah. Oh, that's, Yeah, it's so interesting. You're talking about the idea of abdicating your role as a supervisor. I've actually seen situations where people needed a number of hours for licensure, and they just made a deal with a friend who had the supervisory capacity. Yeah. So it is really concerning because this is supposed to be something that maintains the quality of our profession.
Quality and integrity. And
Quality and integrity.
the integrity has gone out of the windows somewhere along the
Yeah,
line.
in some places that's certainly true. So in the interest of time, because we're coming up on 2 o'clock, in my experience, like I would say that I did not have very good supervision throughout most of my career. And I had wonderful supervisors. They were enormously supportive and knowledgeable. We rarely sat down and exchanged that. They maybe modeled it in the practice. I worked in clubhouses for years. I don't think people know what a clubhouse is, but it's a bit unusual from the get-go. And I'll tell you just a really brief story. I was getting my PhD. I just got it last year, and I was sitting in a class in clinical supervision, and I have a big mouth, and I was complaining how the class didn't seem to be evidence-based. And as a reward for complaining so much, I taught the class the next semester and the semesters after that. So in other words, that's what you get when you complain too much. But but I thought my mission was to look at the evidence for clinical supervision and how can we use that evidence to inform us. So these next couple slides, as you can obviously see, are in fact slides. Come on, people, this is hilarious. This is Ellen DeGeneres. Here's another slide. Yeah, it works a lot better when I can hear you chuckling. So we're good. The timing's going to work out just right. We're going to end on getting, I think, to the three functions, which is where I wanted to get. This comes from Derek Milne, and he talks about one of the reasons it's so hard to study supervision is that this kind of nesting effect that occurs where some consultant or trainer, that I guess in this case it's me, tries to train people in supervision, then the supervisor supervises a supervisee, then the supervisee provides clinical supervision to the client. And there's a lot of places where that can go south or go wrong. But this fellow, Watson, he studied clinical supervision for 30 years. He said the gold standard was if we can show that the training of supervisors leads to better client outcomes, that's the gold standard, right? If our supervision efforts result in improvement in important areas of our clients' lives, then it's worth doing. And he questioned, was it worth doing with all the resources required if we can't show this, right? And honestly, the research has been pretty poor at showing these connections until relatively recently. But that's what we refer to as the gold standard, that the training of the supervisor and the supervisee's supervision and the supervisee's treatment of clients, you can show the connection between improved outcomes. So why do it? Why do it? So I think we're gonna, yeah, we should just be just about right. So research findings, the one area that is undisputable is that we can improve staff satisfaction, right? We can reduce stress, we can increase knowledge, we can increase accountability, we can increase self-awareness. You can just see this is a slew, and this has been highly replicated, these results. Now, these are not client outcomes in this case, but these are outcomes with our subordinates, right? With our supervisees. And I'm gonna send you this slide deck. So you'll have these and you can look up or I'll even send you the articles if you contact me. My email is on the first slide if you're interested in this information. And there's plenty more out there on the impact on staff, right, that are receiving supervision. So recently, however, the relationship has been demonstrated with these more mature interventions, so motivational interviewing and something called multi-systemic therapy and illness management recovery, which I'm very, very familiar with. So we're there now, and I'm going to show you some of the research on how did we get from supporting staff and seeing staff outcomes to actually seeing clinical outcomes based on supervision. So one of my favorite quotes, and I wish SpongeBob was moving his hands and saying imagination. But Derek Milne says, many models of clinical supervision are impressively strong on imagination, but worryingly weak when subjected to careful examination. So many textbooks on clinical supervision, they're interesting, they're provocative, but they're not evidence-based, right? And so that'll be the focus going forward, which is the evidence. So I just want to get to this last. No, we didn't quite make it, did we? So here are the three functions, and I'm going to go back to those slides for our next session, but these are the three functions. They come from Bridget Proctor, and they're restorative, formative, and normative. And we're going to spend a good amount of time talking particularly about the restorative function of clinical supervision. And this is, how do we help our staff stay well and stay capable of being therapeutic and stay healthy, right? And so I want you to just think about that. This is your homework. Think about how you stay well doing this kind of work. Many of you have been doing this for 10 years, 20 years, and you must have, I suspect you have some good insight into how you stay well and how you recommend your supervisees stay well. So we're going to pick it up next time with that. And if you haven't filled out the survey, I'm going to send you the link again. Has anyone not filled out the survey? Give me a wave. If you don't think you've got it, check your junk email, and you might find it there. Is there anything else?
When is our next meeting?
Next meeting is it's 1 o'clock on the 4th Tuesday of February, which is
Is that going to be the regular pattern, just so that we can schedule it out?
That's right. It's the 2nd and 4th Tuesday of the month.
At 1 o'clock always, right?
Yep, always at 1 o'clock, yep.
And we call the same number?
Correct. The link will be the same.
Okay.
I believe. If not, Anne will send you the link. Yeah.
If I have to miss one of these, I'm supposed to be presenting for veterans on March 24th.
Okay.
Will I have access to the PowerPoints after that, or what would be the best way to kind of stay on track?
Yeah, not only will you have the PowerPoint, but you can have the tape. We are recording these, and so you could just watch it. You'll have access to the link to watch the video.
Oh, thank you so much. That's great.
Great. You guys were the best group I've had today by far. And I really enjoyed learning some things about you, what's so interesting about you. And I bet you there's a lot more. So until next time, thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Okay, take care.
Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Have a great day.
Thanks, you too.
Thank you as well.
Okay, thanks.
Wow.